Wales, we conducted a survey about planning ahead, about palliative care and attitudes to the end of life discussions. 3 out of 4 respondents believe that as a community, we don't discuss death and dying enough. And it's a difficult conversation, but the reluctance to not discuss death and dying, of course, will inhibit people's future ideas and planning of care, of medical intervention, of their emotional and psychological response, both of the person who's dying and more broadly, the people that are surrounding that person, the people that love that person, so the loved ones and friends of that person, making sure that people can express in a very comfortable way their final wishes. So we have some fantastic speakers with us today. We're joined by Kerry Noonan, Shane Hickson and Karen Riley. Now they'll introduce themselves and tell you why they are important people to have this discussion with us today. Before I get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land that we're on this morning. We do this as a matter of course to respect our First Nations people. Sometimes I talk to you from the South Coast area of New South Wales, but today I'm here in Sydney and I'm on the land of the Gadigal people, and I pay respect to their elders, past, present and future, and I extend my deep respect to other First Nations people who might be joining us today. So for those of you who don't know, Council on the Ageing does a lot of things. We are the peak body for older people in New South Wales. And when we say older people, that's 50 plus, people over 50. When we say we are the peak body for older people over 50, that means we do a lot of policy and advocacy work on behalf of older people. So we work with politicians, with policymakers, with service providers and the media to make sure that your voices are heard and to make sure that, more importantly, they're acted on. We also provide services, and all of these services are listed on our website, but just a few. Legal pathways, which is very topical in a sense for this conversation we're having today. Unfortunately, our funding for legal pathways is not there, and we've been running this very important service for over 12 years now to help people put in place those end-of-life documents that are so important for the person as well as their family. So we're very sad about that. We also run an aged care navigator service, and that helps people navigate that very complex world of aged care and home and community care services. We do an exercise program called Living Longer, Living Stronger. We also run a program called Older Men, New Ideas, and we have the Community Speaks program. So that's just a very brief overview of what Council on the Ageing New South Wales does. So just a bit of Zoom housekeeping, folks. Everyone except the presenters and the facilitators, pardon me. Or actually, you can't speak to us in a way, but you can tell us some information through the Q&A and through the chat. So the other speakers will be on mute while the other person is telling us the information about death and dying. So this is actually a webinar, it's not a meeting, so you're unable to unmute yourself. And the panelists, the facilitators, we always have to remember to unmute when it's our turn to talk. And that's been a conversation or a word, hasn't it, for the last few years when someone says, Joan, please unmute, we can't hear what you're saying. So we have to make sure that we're alert to that. The Q&A panel, you can ask your own questions at any time by typing them into the Q&A panel. You can also upvote someone else's question if they're asking something that you would like to know. We'll be answering these questions, and to help us do that, we've got Karen Appleby, who is our acting CEO at the moment. She won't be talking with you, but she'll be looking at the questions that come through, and if she can answer them, she will, or if she can refer you to some resources, she'll do that as well. There's the chat panel, so you can make a comment during the presentation, and I'll try and get to as many of those as I can so that your questions will be answered as best we can. We can't do them all, folks, so can you keep your questions fairly short and respectful? And as I said, we'll get to some of them, we won't get to all of them. Excitingly, this event is being recorded and it will be available in the next few days on our website and also on COTA New South Wales YouTube channel. And all our other webinars are there as well. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and fellow board director, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Joan, and welcome to everyone. First, I'd also like to acknowledge that we meet today on Aboriginal land, always was and always will be. I'm on Gamaragal land and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I make note that First Nations cultures have survived on this continent for over 60,000 years, and prior to 1788, people were in better health than by most of today's indicators. And one of the ways that enabled families and communities to thrive in life and death were social structures based on self and mutual care and conversations. I'm passionate about this topic. I've been a GP for 50 years and I've seen how this topic of death and dying has become over-medicalised. It's a topic of great interest to COTA New South Wales. For many years, I've worked with the Groundswell project that journeys with communities and individuals to improve how people die in Australia, care and grieve. It's also an important issue that COTA New South Wales supports. And as mentioned earlier, COTA New South Wales have produced a comprehensive and accessible report and also trained our community speakers in delivering planning ahead information to community groups. Here at COTA New South Wales, we believe it's important to support broader discussions around death and dying, that it shouldn't be a taboo subject and medicalised, the domain only of the medical profession and hospitals. This discussion, conversation, yarn, whatever you like to call it, can include your own personal wishes as we come to end of life in terms of our care, our planning, our end of life legal documents, such as advanced care directives and enduring guardianships, and most important, speaking with our loved ones to make sure that they know what our wishes are. COTA New South Wales recently supported a voluntary assisted dying campaign because we believe in choice. We also support strong investment in palliative care services for the same reason. So I thank the speakers we have here today and look forward to the discussion. As always, ensure that you make comments in the chat panel and ask questions in the Q&A panel. And as Joan said, we'll get to as many of those as we can. So to start with, I'd like to introduce Kerry Noonan, and she'll describe to us what she does in her life. I've known Kerry for over a decade, and she's a very trusted colleague.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here. It's great to join the 50 Club this year as well. So yes, it's great. It's a great privilege. I'm here in Dubbo on Wiradjuri land, and I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today and pay my respect to Aboriginal elders who may be present and Aboriginal elders, Aboriginal people that may be emerging leaders as well. So thank you so much for inviting me today. My task is to talk a little bit about talking about death and why we should have the conversation, to kind of really set the scene for the rest of the talks today, but also to talk about to kind of get us cracking, I think, thinking about why it's important. So a little bit about me. My background is, well, I've got a few different hats, but I work as a clinical psychologist. I'm in my clinic today, in a GP clinic out here in Dubbo. And I also work as a social researcher and work around the death and dying field, compassionate communities work that Stephen already mentioned. I was the founder of the Groundswell Project and Dying to Know Day. So it's very exciting to see Dying to Know Day to continue to grow every year and to be part of conversations like this. It's very exciting for me as someone who started. And I think Dying with Dignity, we were one of our first organisations to get on Dying to Know Day too, way back in the day, Shane. So it's exciting to be here with you today too. All right, so that's enough about me. Actually, the only other thing I would say is that I currently am the director of the Death Literacy Institute. So we are kind of continuing the work around death literacy and compassionate communities, working with organisations and people, and we've worked with COTA over the past year as well. Great. All right, let me crack on. Let's get on with it. So I'm going to share my screen. And everyone can see that okay? Great. So I do welcome comments and thoughts, and I'm going to ask you to please contribute to the chat as we go along today as well. It's great to have interaction. I'm going to turn my camera off, but so the topic of today really for me is why talk about dying and death. And I guess the main reason is because it may feel like a topic that is not close to home, but actually it's something that all of us, of course, are facing, whether it's our own personal experience or a family member or a friend or someone in our community. We are all facing death, dying, loss and grief together. So the other reason is when we ask, so I'm going to just share some information as well about, share some stats along the way in this talk this morning, but when we ask people, have they experienced the death of someone, particularly in the 55-year-old age group, most of us have experienced the death of someone close. So that makes it a really important topic. But let's give some social context. We know that only 1 in 5 or less, depending on where we're from, die with an advanced care plan. So, an advanced care plan is an important planning document and conversational piece that helps us plan for the end of our life and the things that we do and don't want. And I'm saying do and don't want because often we talk about advanced care planning as something, thinking about the things that we don't want, but actually it's just as equally important to think about the things that we do want around the end of our life. We know that fewer people who want to die at home do. And we know that if you want to die at home, it does take some planning, and it does mean talking and communicating with not only our healthcare team, but our family and the people who will support us. We know also that only 25% of people who are dying share their wishes as well. So even for people who are towards the end of their life, sharing wishes can be difficult. I also want to challenge the myth of taboo. So some of the work that COTA has done has already really put this to life. And Joan gave some stats before that we often talk about death as a taboo topic, but actually death is, if you think about the last time you watched a TV show or a movie, there's death and dying all around us, everywhere, in social media, in our communities, in our on the news. So the idea that we're not talking about death is actually not true. So the question for me then becomes more about the context that we're having conversations around death and dying. What is it that we're doing as a society that we need to keep saying that death is a taboo? why do we keep doing that if we know that technically actually it's not a taboo topic? So the other part, I guess, of this social kind of context really is that dying, death, loss, grief have become quite medicalized and become part of, diagnosis and medicalization and institutionalization. So it has been a topic that really, for probably, maybe it started to change, I think, the last decade or so, but still a lot of these conversations are happening within a medical or a health context and not in a social context. So when we talk about death and dying, sometimes I think it's even helpful to go, let's normalize these conversations, but let's push further. Let's socialize these conversations in a way that's appropriate for our communities and our families. So it's a tweak on the language, but if you think about socializing, then what happens is we start to then think about context. And I think context is everything when it comes to these conversations. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But I would love to hear, what are your experiences around this? If you want to share some in the chat around, what are some of the social things you've noticed that maybe make it challenging, but also if you've had a positive experience talking about death and dying, share it. Tell us about it on the chat, because I think it's really important that we also share these kind of positive conversations that are happening.
Kerry, can I just you just sparked something that's come through here, and there's been a few comments around the language that professionals use, for example, doctors and lawyers, and how people find it quite difficult, especially if they're emotional, to then be able to be strong enough to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. So it's a bit what Stephen said about the whole process become so medical, but the issue about language, explaining to people, what does this mean legally, whether it's to do with advanced care directives, enduring power of attorney and those sorts of documents.
Yes. So yeah, we've created, haven't we, a whole language around something that in some ways is actually quite simple. And yeah, it's really tricky. All that language, it's like you have to learn a new language, right? And that's the medicalization side of things. And I would say that's why it's important to have these conversations in our families and in the context of our families and our communities, because in those contexts, we're not going to use we're not going to use the medical language, and we're going to use social language. We're going to use familiar language, and that's really very important as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that too, Joan, in the context of death literacy in a moment as well. The other thing about language, good timing, Joan, is, of course, euphemisms. So we have like all the professionalized language, but we also have all the euphemisms that we use. I'd love you to share some. There are some there, but there are some crackers around, aren't there, in terms of the way that we talk about what we will do to avoid the word death or dying. And again, in our medical context. So I can't tell you how many times when I was working in a hospital, someone would say, a doctor would say, or a nurse would say, so-and-so is deteriorating. And what they were saying is dying. But they didn't want to use the word, even in a medical context. So, and we know that if you're using a euphemism in a medical context, that actually can be really difficult, right? Because it's a very different thing to call a family member and say, your father is deteriorating versus your father is dying. You're going to make different decisions about whether or not it's time to come to the hospital, say goodbyes, do what you need to do based on the language that even health professionals use. And even just listening to the media. We've had 3 very significant Australians die recently, and so many, there was a combination. I was listening, I always listen out for the language. When my kids were little, actually, I would sometimes, we'd be listening to the news and in the background it'd say so-and-so passed away today. And I would, one of my kids, I still remember her, she was about 4 at the time, she went, died, really loud in the background. So we do need to think about our language. Let's talk a little bit about death literacy, because I think this is where COTA is, and the members of COTA are amazing. When we talk about death literacy, we talk about an ex-parrot. That's good, Colin. Sorry. So when we talk about death literacy, at the Death Literacy Institute, we talk about the SEAK model, SEAK, skills, experience, action and attitudes, and knowledge. And so one of the things that our death literacy is like our know-how. It's like, how do we navigate all those things? How do we understand the language? How do you put all of that skill and experience and knowledge into action to be able to get the funeral that we want, the dying that we want, the care that we want, and so on. And this is really important because knowledge is one thing. COTA is a knowledgeable group. When we did the death literacy index with, and you might remember it a few years ago if you're a member, 800 people filled in the death literacy index at COTA, and it's one of the biggest databases we've ever had, the biggest group we've ever had. And guess what? You all as a group scored higher than the national average on death literacy. Well, that is super significant, right? But then when we asked people at COTA whether or not, what kind of actions they were taking, very few people had had a conversation with their GP about what was important to them. So having knowledge is one thing and super important. Being able to put that into action is the next step. And I would say that's why we have conversations, so that we can put these things into action. So we've already talked about the comfort level that's already in our communities. If you ask people generally how comfortable they are talking about death and dying, these are the stats that we usually see. COTA stats are the same. So over 70% of people usually say that they're very comfortable or somewhat comfortable talking about death, dying, loss and grief. So let's talk about some of the how. So these are some quick suggestions. I know there's a lot more to say, but I've got 10 minutes. So use context. I've already talked about that, but when you're updating important documents or something happens, a family event or a change in health, use that context to spark conversations around death, dying, loss and grief, and about your planning and about what you would like. That's one way, an easy way to kind of roll into the conversation. Another thing is really reflecting on your own experiences and your values, what's important to you. So if, for example, and Shane's going to talk about this later, but if that is important to you, or donating your body to science is important to you, both of those things take planning. They take appointments, paperwork, conversations, all kinds of things. They don't happen, they don't just happen right towards the end of life. And if they do, it risks meaning that you will not be able to do those things. So donating your body to science, for example, often people want to do that, but don't know that there's a process. That is going to be the same. And that's been some of the experiences we know are important. If we're avoiding talking about advanced care planning and other documents, then that is something that is definitely going to kind of bring us right up into having to have these conversations early. Do it while you're well. So just to kind of build on what I was saying before, often we're told, oh, you're too no, you're too well. You don't need to worry about that yet. Don't worry, you've got heaps of years left, or there are lots of reasons or lots of things that we're told to put off the conversation, but do it while you're well. Do it while you can, and when you have control over the words that you're able to express or write down. And importantly, it's not one conversation. So, and I think this is something we kind of often underestimate. So we talk about the conversation, but actually it's many conversations. And I'd love to hear anyone in the chat reflecting on that. It rarely happens in one conversation, right? You bring it up with your kids and they go, oh, no, don't talk about that yet. And even if they go, yep, I'm here, let's talk about it. It's not just one conversation. There are a number of things that need to be kind of processed. And what tends to happen is it's many conversations. It's a series of conversations, allowing feelings to settle, to evolve, and to allow for new ideas in that conversation as well. And that's it. I hope that's been helpful in getting our conversation started today.
Oh, Kerry, it's been terrific. Thank you so much. Look, there's so many comments coming through. There are some that are directed to you. You might like to have a look at those.
Yeah.
I think there is this common thing around language, and a couple of people have said, they can't stand the word past. Why don't people just say someone has died? But as Stephen has pointed out, some of those words aren't respectful, especially in our First Nations communities and some multicultural communities as well. So the language side of things is a very important thing to get some knowledge about. And there's also been a few comments too about all of the documents you need in place. So we have a lawyer who's joined us, and importantly out there, folks, it's not just a will. You have to think about a will, the enduring power of attorney, advanced care directive. So there's a whole lot of documents that you need to do those things while you are well. So that's a key message that's come from Kerry's presentation as well. So Kerry, thank you so much. You've got it all started. I can't keep up with all the chats that are coming through. So that's great. I'd now like to introduce Shane. Shane is the CEO of Dignity with Dying New South Wales. And as Stephen pointed out, COTA New South Wales saw that as an important campaign. It was a difficult campaign. It was a very courageous campaign, and we see it as a choice for the older people that we represent. So over to you, Shane.
Thanks, Joan. Like Joan, I'm on Gadigal land, so I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm very pleased to have been invited to be part of this webinar today, and so thank you for the invitation. But I also want to take the opportunity to thank COTA for their support during the recent campaign to legalise voluntary assisted dying. It was just 3 months ago in May that New South Wales became the last state to pass voluntary assisted dying laws. So what that means is that any of us here watching today, or someone we love, faces the tragic circumstance of a terminal diagnosis, and we reach the end stage with unbearable suffering, we will now have, or when it comes into effect, which is November next year, we will have the right to choose to die quickly and peacefully at a time and place of our choosing, and usually surrounded by our loved ones. So today's webinar is obviously about the importance of open and honest conversations to have with our loved ones. So now that voluntary assisted dying is a legal option, and I must stress it's not everyone will have that option, but I believe that the conversations are even more important. And I think Joan mentioned that, and also Kerry. So seeing that I am the speaker, as Joan said, I was the Vice President of Dying with Dignity through the whole campaign. Now I'm the part-time CEO, because obviously we will have still a lot to do during this implementation phase, but also once the law is implemented. And we know that because the Dying with Dignity organisations in all the other states are already ahead of us, and they are playing important roles. So seeing that I'm the speaker focusing on voluntary assisted dying, I think it's important that I just summarise the law to let people know who may not know who can actually access the law. And even though the laws across Australia are very similar, I will focus on the New South Wales law. For someone to be able to access voluntary assisted dying when the law takes effect on the 28th of November next year, they'll have to be an adult, so 18 years or over. I'm very sorry about that. I thought I'd turned off everything on my phone. They have to be an adult. They have to have been diagnosed with a terminal illness that will cause death within 6 months, or in the case of neurodegenerative diseases within 12 months, and they need to be experiencing intolerable suffering as a result of that condition. There are residency requirements that limit access to Australian citizens or permanent residents, and or in New South Wales, it's slightly different from some of the other states, for someone who has lived in Australia for at least 3 continuous years, and they ordinarily reside in New South Wales. There are strict provisions to ensure that someone has the capacity to make and understand the voluntary assisted dying decision, and that they are acting voluntarily and without pressure or duress. In order for someone to access this end-of-life choice, they have to make the request themselves. So this is not something that a family member can ask for, or a carer, or anybody else. It has to be the dying individual. It cannot be made, that the request cannot be made in an advanced care directive, and that's because the person has to maintain decision-making capacity throughout the whole process. They have to make at least 3 requests, and one of those has to be in writing, and there has to be 2 witnesses to that written request. The doctors, the assessment of the criteria is done by 2 independent medical practitioners, and those practitioners have to meet minimum requirements in relation to their qualifications and also their experience, and they also have to have done a special voluntary assisted dying training. All the doctors who will be trained, who choose to do the training, will be trained to be able to recognise signs of pressure or duress. And if they are unsure whether the person is acting voluntarily or whether pressure or duress is a factor, they are required to refer the patient to someone who has the skills and the training to make a determination. So that could be a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a social worker, police. It all depends on a case-by-case basis. So obviously it is important. You can see through, because of that very highly safeguarded process, it is really important for individuals to have those conversations with loved ones, and as the others have pointed out before, and I think someone in the chat pointed out, it'd be really good to have that before you become ill. It's important that your family understands what you might be considering. And it's not that you're going to be locking in that decision. It's just, I think it would be good to express at an early stage whether, a voluntary assisted dying might be something that you would consider. So obviously, I already know that I don't want to die the way my mum did, and some of you might know, because my story's been told on a number of times, my mum died of brain cancer. So I've already had that conversation, obviously, with my partner and our daughter. So there won't be any surprises from my family or friends or even colleagues if I find myself with a terminal illness, that voluntary assisted dying would be my choice. But for other people who aren't, haven't been closely involved with that campaign, when the law, maybe some of you have already had that conversation because the law passed in May. Maybe when it comes into effect in November, you might raise the conversation perhaps after it appears on the news. I think that would be very helpful. I know from all the conversations that I've had with family members who have witnessed, loved ones in terrible end-of-life circumstances, the discussions around ways of alleviating that person's suffering come from a place of love and compassion. So not out of frustration or exhaustion, or as some opponents have said during the debate, as from a desire for an early inheritance. But that is why I think it is far better if the option of voluntary assisted dying is raised, that it is raised, by the person rather than the family member. I just think that will help. It may not always be the case if someone hasn't made that discussion. I did speak to the navigators in Victoria before, while preparing this speech, because I was curious. In Victoria, the medical practitioners cannot initiate the conversation about voluntary assisted dying. Now in the other states, they can, as long as they also raise the options of palliative care, treatment options, and talk about the other things. But I was just curious, is there any restriction with family members? But apparently there definitely is not. So you have the option to contact the Care Navigator service when the law is, comes into effect in November, and they will answer any questions. And that conversation with the care navigators doesn't have to be the dying person. But as I said, I feel as an individual, I think to avoid any sort of complication for your family, for your loved ones, I think if it's the person themselves, not just about voluntary assisted dying, for all your end of life plans, and I think the others would agree. I know that my own mum would have, she would have been able to access assisted dying, as in she would have been eligible, because she had aggressive brain cancer and had a diagnosis of less than 12 months, but she actually only had 7.5 months. But she expressed her wish, even though it wasn't legal. She did say to the doctors early on, I do not want to suffer at the end stages. You will help me, won't you? But of course, this is before voluntary assisted dying was legal in any state in Australia. And so those doctors weren't able to respond to that request because, of course, it was illegal. But now that, assisted dying has been legal, I think it will make those conversations so much easier for both for the patient, but also for the doctors. If someone talks about not wanting to suffer the end stages, that voluntary assisted dying can be considered. I think someone mentioned earlier that because voluntary assisted dying is a very highly safeguarded process, it is certainly something that should be considered early on. It isn't an option that you have to go through with. Patients can change their mind at any stage, right up until the very end. But what they've found in Victoria, where the law's been operating for nearly 3 years, 3 years, yes, 3 years, is that sometimes people leave it too late, and that means that they actually pass away. Oh, sorry, there you go. I've used the P word. They die before being able to complete the process. And of course, the sicker that a person is, the more the illness is taking over, the more difficult it is for them to get to appointments and that sort of thing. So it is not that you are rushing to possibly follow this option early in the illness, but if you've successfully got through the process that creates such a strong palliative effect, then that person can relax and know that they have that safety net, because that's how I see it as an advocate for voluntary assisted dying. It is a last resort option if palliative care isn't able to alleviate those end-of-life symptoms. And we know from Palliative Care Australia itself that there are about 4% of people who can't have their suffering relieved, and some between 10 and 20% of symptoms cannot be relieved. So it won't be for everyone, but it is I think such a great thing that this law has now passed to give people an option. So I think that's probably, I think I did also want to mention the conversations between doctors and their patients. So I've still got time. I think I haven't gone.
We might, Shane, just actually bring that up when we have the panel discussion, because Stephen will be facilitating that. He's a GP, so that will be a good conversation to develop a bit further. But just before I thank you sincerely, Shane, you mentioned that you can't have voluntary assisted dying mentioned in your advanced care directive, but can you mention it in other documents like a will, for example?
No, well, the thing is that I don't think it would matter. In fact, I did my advanced care directive not that long ago. And I think I did put in that obviously an advanced care directive, and I'm not an expert on it, but I do understand what they are for. They are for when someone has lost decision-making capacity. So under the current law, if you have lost decision-making capacity, you will not be able to access the law, and the law is quite, every law in Australia is very strict on that. But even overseas, where their laws are a little bit more, liberal, they still do not administer voluntary assisted dying to people who no longer have decision-making capacity. Yes, in some jurisdictions in the Netherlands, in Europe, including the Netherlands, people with dementia have access to assisted dying, but they have done so at the very early stages of dementia, once you have lost decision-making capacity. So in a way, I suppose by mentioning it, that because all of you who have done advanced care directives will know that you put down various scenarios for, if I reach this stage, I don't recognise my family, or my suffering is unbearable, I can't feed myself or whatever, then I want to refuse all treatment or whatever you outline. So it is possible to say, if I reach this stage, I would like voluntary assisted dying. But what you're anticipating is that there will be a change in the law. And at this stage, there is no sign that there will be a change in the law that will allow someone to access assisted dying if they don't know what's happening to them. And I spoke to a lot of doctors through the campaign, and most of that comes because a doctor does not want to administer life-ending medication to someone who doesn't understand what is happening to them.
Sure.
Even when they had capacity, it's what they requested. It is a step too far for most doctors. Now, whether that changes sometime in the future, so for a younger person, writing an advanced care directive, if you're in your 40s or 50s, maybe in decades to come, after assisted dying has been around, who knows? So I'm not saying you cannot put it, but I'm saying under the current laws, no one who has lost capacity will be able to access assisted dying.
Okay. I think it was also in the context, Jane, that people who are listening to you have already got these documents in place, and the question was, well, can we add this now? Can we update it? And I think a good principle is you should be updating those documents anyway, as law changes and as your situation changes, so they're relevant, because what you do now could be very different from when you actually filled out those documents, 10 years ago or 8 years ago. All right, Jane, thank you very much. Now, our third speaker today is Karen Riley. So welcome, Karen, it's lovely to have you with us. And then I'm going to hand over to Stephen after Karen has talked with us. She'll tell you what she does in her amazing career that she's involved in, a very holistic approach to our topic today. So, Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan, and what a privilege it is to be here today and to talk to you on such an important subject that, as it's very apparent, we're all very passionate about, and it most definitely is overdue for many of us to have these open and respectful conversations. So it's such a privilege to be here. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I'll be really honest with you, we may sway from the PowerPoint, but let's just give this a go, shall we? Just bear with me. All right. So I am a end of life doula. Many people may not have heard those words before, or that role at all. It can be known as a death doula or a death walker. Lots of different names can be associated with this role. And I'm just going to take you a little bit through about a little bit who I am, but also why I do what I do and what brought me to where I am now. I am an established natural therapist practitioner. So I have had a clinic in the inner west of Sydney for 10 years. And I do various different things within that clinic, reflexology and Reiki and massage, and lots of other workshops around wellness. Now, as you can imagine, in that field of wellness, lots of people don't like to talk about death because we're always talking about wellness. And what I found over the years that naturally I attracted a lot of clients in my clinic that had cancer diagnoses as well as terminal illnesses. And this was an ongoing observation as I was growing as a practitioner and expanding my work with different therapies. And I really felt that there was this call to expand my clinical knowledge. And I trained in a lot of specialized oncology, massage, and some reflexology and Reiki courses specifically around supporting people that were going through an oncology-based journey. And before very long, it was very apparent that I was already a doula offering holistic support without really naming that word. And it was a natural progression. And I found Helen Callahan at Preparing the Way. She does a wonderful course that is now offering a Cert 4 in end-of-life doula training, which is really exciting for them. And it was a real privilege to work for her and so to train with her, because it really did make me realize that for many years, my own resistance to talk about death within my own family makeup, as well as my beautiful mirror of my husband, who is my continuing teacher to talk about death more, which I compassionately say, but it has also been a wonderful journey witnessing those conversations that are not always greeted with grace and open-mindedness, and yeah, even a conversation, it can be shut down. So as an end-of-life doula, I've had the privilege to actually work with many clients who are considered young to die, as well as senior age groups. Recently, I've worked mainly with families and individuals that span in the age group of the age 30 to 65. And this is often due to unexpected health declines or terminal illness, where the support is needed more because of the shock that comes into the system of the family of a terminal diagnosis, and how everyone starts integrating and moving out from that original diagnosis and treatment and further into the dying process. I'm also an NDIS support carer, and I offer that support alongside my doula work. And more than anything, this has strengthened my knowledge of empowering individuals to make choices about how they wish to live their lives, and really explore the variety of options available. Because I do think that we often get set in our ways of just looking at something in one view, rather than just opening up our peripheral vision and just seeing what else is as an option. And we've already had wonderful discussions already today about some of those subjects, so I won't go over some of those. So what is an end-of-life doula, or a death doula, or a death walker? So the term doula is a Greek word. It's meaning a person of service, but ultimately this is a person who supports. As an end-of-life doula myself, I offer non-medical, holistic, compassionate support to people who are living with terminal illnesses or conditions from which they will die. An end-of-life doula also facilitates clients and their loved ones through the end stage of life. Now, this can show up in lots of different ways. This can be educational. This can be having a chat and a discussion about some of the things we've already discussed today, and COTA have in depth discussed along your journey of discussing death literacy. But also it allows people to feel that there is someone they're neutral, that's not part of their medical system, they're not medical team, that's not medically trained, but also is there to say, I'm here to listen, I'm here to have presence in this conversation, and let's explore, or let me gather the information that you might need to help you make those decisions or implement anything you would like. So my biggest passion there is that end-of-life doulas, we are a collaboration, and hopefully in time, we will bridge the gap where formal services are not available or cannot fill the needs and demands of arising in our ageing community. It's a really important thing, and I know that Kerry's already touched on it. Lots of people express the want to die at home, but many of them don't, for many different reasons. This also isn't just about support services or expressing their desires to do so. Also comes down to the family, their capacity, you know, how they feel about things as well. And as a doula, I think the most enriching conversation I've had is with the family that the person wanted to die at home, but the family actually felt really restricted in their capacity to do so. And all it took was a really simple conversation, calling in the community palliative care team for us to have an open conversation about what that might look like, and for them to really feel empowered that it wasn't a scary process. And I think that's a really important thing to note. Regardless of where we sit on this ease of conversation around death, many of us have an undercurrent of what we were told before us. And not all of that is positive, or in fact open. So we have to be aware that some conversations take a couple of times to have, because we do need to explore every option so that everyone's feeling comfortable, empowered, and so that we can actually allow the person who is dying to meet their needs and for them to move through and die as peacefully and compassionately as we hope that you know, that they wish to. So as an end-of-life doula, I offer lots of different things, and I just want to go through a couple of different things that I offer as a service as an end-of-life doula, so you really understand some of the things that can come into discussion when you engage with an end-of-life doula. More importantly, we are here to support and hear your wishes around your own death, what you want and what you don't want. I think Kerry or Shana already mentioned, you know, often we only write what we don't want. And that's again, through our own experience of experiencing someone else that has died in our life. I know around that, I just wanted to make a note. The gentleman that I'm actually looking after at the moment, he, you know, a lot of these wishes around his own death, he's got a terminal glioblastoma multiforme brain tumor, and his cognition is declining, which has restricted some of these conversations to be implemented, I suppose, in some respect. But the one thing that he carries is the death of his own father. And he's a young man under 50. And, you know, that's what he's holding on to. He's holding on to what he doesn't want to witness, what he doesn't want to put his family through in his own death. So we've explored that a lot, and we've spoken to his medical team so that even if we can't put things down, everyone understands he does not want to be in pain. And of course, they've reassured him, and we've documented that at this time, that, you know, we will do everything within our power to make sure he's as comfortable as possible and in the place that he wishes to die. All right. We do help and people to complete their advanced care documents and inquire around their legal requirements. Again, I'm not an expert in this field, but I am here to help gather you the information. As we've already discussed, it's not just a will that often people think that we have to put in place. And I'll be very honest with you, I went into my own training around being an end-of-life doula with a perception that I knew what I had to get done, and I really didn't. So I think it's important for us always to keep talking about those things, as well as the advanced care documents. I also like to include a New South Wales ambulance care plan document in there, certainly if they're on a non-resuscitation order, because I really think that that's important to have that ready in case anything quickly developed in regards to their health, and a family calls an ambulance. and that's purely out of habit. Let's just put that out there. It's not because we need an ambulance. It's because it's their it's a resource that they immediately or can call in on. We explore your funeral wishes and end of life celebrations and what that means to you as a person. And on the flip side of things, if you are navigating a terminal illness or decline in health, we actually help navigate the hospital and aged care systems to hopefully try and advocate your wants and needs and allow you to get the services that you need to. We also offer support and advocacy in medical appointments. And as I mentioned, the gentleman that I'm working with right now, because he's young and he doesn't have any family here, his family are overseas, I've attended most of his medical appointments, writing notes and conveying that back, allowing us to recall discussions in those medical appointments, but also moving that information onto his family who hold those power of attorney positions in his life and enduring guardianship. And I've noticed the longer that I've been doing that medical appointment notes, we've already just touched on language, but it's really interesting to see how the person receives the same information. Two people can be in one appointment with a medical professional, and they can be two completely different discussions happening in their own minds. So I really think the importance of taking those extra medical notes, really as secretarial notes, I suppose, of those meetings, so that you can recall and go over, because it does feel incredibly overwhelming to people, not only with language, but when they have been diagnosed with something that is, predominantly turning up their world and everything that they feel is around them. And it's scary. Let's just be honest. When you have a terminal illness or prognosis that comes out of the blue, it can be very scary for the recipient. So yeah, that's something I also do as well. Of course, nearer the end of life, we do active dying vigilance, and we also can advise of in-home care support services if you want to die at home, but also if your loved one has died in hospital and you want to bring them home for a vigil, depending on your cultural background, or more importantly, your community that needs to embrace the grief process, because a lot of people and we have all lived through COVID for the last 3 years, and lots of people have missed out on this element of being able to have everyone at funerals, to have to be in medical systems like hospitals, to be there at the end of life. And we've all kind of been holding this collective grief of COVID, as well as these individual journeys that have been woven through, where people are still not grieving healthily, I suppose I should say, or at least in a way that is productive for us all to recognize that this is a part of life. Ultimately, my passion and commitment to my clients as an end-of-life doula is to really be there for the dying person, so they have a neutral person to feel supported and help them express and convey their wishes to their loved ones. I'm also available for the family, so they have a neutral, compassionate support person to help them navigate their end-of-life process and witnessing someone they love who's dying. That's really important, because often I may only have small moments of my doula work with the person who's dying. Most of my time and my experience with this has been really with the family, helping them navigate the systems, helping them navigate how they feel to support that person. And families are complex. Let's be honest, families can be complex, and not everyone grieves the same way. Not everyone deals with death in the same way within a family, certainly if it's siblings and it's a parent. And there can be, it's not always very nice to be in a household with people with opposing views. It can be quite volatile at a time that it really doesn't need to be. We need to be So sometimes I act a little bit of a mediator, it can be in those situations, but ultimately I'm there just to hold space for us to listen, for us to mirror back some ideas, for us to explore how people can feel more comfortable with what the person who's dying wants, so that we can move through this with a bit more grace. So when would you engage with an end-of-life doula? Now, as both of our wonderful panelists have already expressed, ideally I want you to contact someone now, or certainly have those conversations within your family when you're fit and healthy. In fact, because of the age group that I have extensively worked in recently, of people that I've worked with, I want people in their 30s, in their 40s, to make sure they've got this paperwork done, to make sure that they recognize that it's important to do it when you are well. So regardless of age, when you are well, let's have these conversations and do this work, so and get the paperwork and conversations happening, so that we can actually start this culture of dying better. However, realistically, most families or clients only make their first contact when health suddenly changes or they have a diagnosis. I also get contacted closer to the end of people's lives when they're seeking additional holistic support to hold their loved ones in comfort and a deepened presence. Now, I suppose weaving in my natural therapies clinic is important there near the end, because it's really important for us to embrace if a person who's dying gets comfort through touch, for people not to feel scared about touching their loved ones, to hold their hands, to, wash their faces, to do all of that sort of contact that's really viscerally comforting to someone that may be in and out of a pain cycle or medication. So there's lots of different ways that can be executed, I suppose, with a family, but ultimately they just need someone to say, how do you want to navigate this? Okay, that's an option, rather than that's not an option, don't be silly, let's just listen, no disrespect to the medical profession. We have to look a little bit out of the box sometimes, because everyone has different needs. So I've got a little slide here that I also wanted to share, which is a beautiful slide that I have from Natural Grace, which are holistic funeral directors down in Victoria. And I want to thank Libby Maloney for allowing me to share this screen document today. And this is really the end of life stages. And when I first saw this document, I really, like the penny dropped for me as a natural health practitioner, because I was already doing this. I'm already working with people when they're living well. And really for me, this flowchart really shows me that you can engage any of these conversations at all of these spots, but end-of-life doulas can actually hold your hand and walk you through them all. And I think that was a really wonderful thing that that I felt that I could offer to the community around me, because it was just about not being scared and being open and saying, dying is the one thing we're all guaranteed to do. Like, it totally is. So let's just feel a little bit more comforted in walking this path. And that could be with the right medical care. It could be the right documents that you might have. It could be having those conversations with your family. But ultimately, I want to make sure that people are feeling empowered still, right to the end, because I think that's it. It's us being human. No one wants to be disempowered. So there's a little bit of a synopsis again about that end of life, the 10 stages: living well, the diagnosis of illness or aging, living with terminal illness, palliative care and active dying, end of life and when death occurs, after death, and natural death care, vigil and ceremony, which is very important, funeral, memorial, celebration of life and ritual, body disposal and bereavement, and care of the living. All of those stages really need to be something that I hold deeply in the forefront of my mind whenever I enter into a discussion around this with a family, or in fact a person who is dying, because there's a long journey ahead of us, all right, for some people, and sometimes it's shorter and unexpected. So how do you find an end-of-life doula? We've got two amazing resources here, and I know that there are wonderfully independent end-of-life doulas working all around Australia, and certainly we have a large group of ones in New South Wales. The Australian Doula College actually supports the training from the Preparing of the Way from Helen Canahan, and she has a wonderful search response on their website. So if you want to engage with an end-of-life doula, you can search through your area, and they will hopefully connect you with someone in your area that you can start having these conversations with if you need to, or if you want to. Preparing the Way obviously have their own database of all of their students that have completed their training, and soon will be publishing their Cert 4, people that have qualified in that manner as well. That's just rolling out this year, so it's a brand new course, an expansion of Helen's work that she's dedicated already. But ultimately, you know, for me as an end-of-life doula, I have a really strengthened relationship with my local palliative care team here in Sydney. The community palliative care nurses know me, know what I do. Sometimes referrals come through them. Also, just GPs in my community or other health professionals that may encounter a family that is struggling at the time. And what I have to recognize for me, even in my own clinic, I'm still attracting those clients that need to find me, either with terminal illnesses or their family member, that their a family member is dying or aging, and they just have questions.
Okay, Karen, that was just terrific. It gives people some more information to have those conversations and to look at it from a holistic point of view. So terrific. Now, folks, it's over to Stephen now to walk us through some questions and some interactions with the panelists, and also with your questions that have come through. Stephen, over to you. I'll just check.
I just wanted to ask one question of Karen. It's a simple, quick question, but it may not be a quick question, but let's try and keep it brief. One of the questions that came in is, how much does it cost to engage a doula? So
individual doulas set their own rates.
Yep.
What we do is an hourly rate. So we usually have a meeting with the family and say, okay, where are we at? What are we looking at? You know, are we at the end of stages of life? What services do you need from us? And we usually say, well, in our experience, this may be 5 hours work, for example, or this could be a continuation of something weekly or long term. For my client that I'm currently working with at the moment, he is, because he has no family here, the biggest promise that I've made to them is that he won't be alone when he dies. So for me, I clock in as regularly as I can, but I also facilitate paperwork and things in the background for his services. Yeah.
And what roughly is the hourly rate, I suppose?
I would say it is between $35 and $50, $65. Obviously, other I would say it's similar to a social support rate through NDIS. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. It was really good. What I've certainly found, you know, in helping people die at home, is that it's surprising how many people there can be in that person's community, friends. One social worker says, you know, there's always something in the larder. There's always some old friend who can be called on, who's a physio or has been a nurse and knows those skills. And the skills are very easy to learn. I mean, Kerry, I'm sure, will agree with this. And once you've been at a death, you're very capable of performing some role. Everyone's got their own skills and roles. So it has become very much the domain of doctors. But the person who taught me in palliative care said 95% of it is really very simple and can usually be done by family and friends. In fact, the giving of end-of-life medication, the morphine and such, can't be given by a volunteer who comes in from the local health district, but can be done by a family member after very, very quick instruction. So that's just to normalize to some degree from my experience. Kerry, I wanted to ask you, sometimes we speak of compassion, and I think there was a question in there about compassion. I've heard a definition that compassion is empathy and action. So some people will want to know, how do we get this conversation going? I remember you had an event you put on once, which was a dinner. And of course, you had some playing cards with little things written on them, questions. And that, again, it normalized it. There, you've got them. They are available. Maybe we'll put those on the website as well. I mean, we can just have dinners with each other. What have you found helpful, Kerry? Yep.
Yeah. Yes. You know, I do like the use of kind of things like these cards. These are conversation cards that have all kinds of questions on them. I'll sit with people and just go through them. But, you know, community is such an important aspect, I think, and can't be undervalued around caring for end of life and having the conversation. So, you know, some of the research that we've done and kind of work we've done in communities, we find that that, you know, some communities are as small as 4, the neighbor, you know, your partner and one of your kids and the dog, 5 maybe. And they can be as big as 50. You know, some of the work that we did were with people, they were able to identify 50 people that supported them. So I think there are some questions, I can see some questions there about, you know, it doesn't mean that you need to be wealthy. Not everyone has community. I think our community are the people, are also the people that we speak to on the phone, you know, that we may just email with, we may share Christmas cards with. So I would expand as much as we can that sense of community, to really expand to the people in our neighborhoods as well. Yeah. But compassion, yeah. And look, we could talk forever about compassion, self-compassion, compassion towards others. But when we bring compassionate communities together, it's really about just, I guess, acknowledging that we've all got a role to play in supporting each other around our death, dying, our loss and our grief. And certainly, you know, thinking about how those small acts of kindness, whether it's taking food or sending a card, making a call, sending a text, they're all part of being part of a compassionate community.
Thank you. Thank you. Some people have mentioned in the chat room and wondered around, you know, when is the best time to start writing your documents. And one of the things I like to tell people is that Barack and Michelle Obama, one of the first things they did when Barack Obama came into the presidency was to announce publicly that they had written their advanced care plans. And that really set the scene. They were young, vibrant. So I'm just concerned that there are a lot of documents that people have to consider. I don't know which one of you would like to just take us through quite simply. It is all on the COTA website and in that document, but just to do a very quick run through of the order in which priority you would say it's important to get those documents signed. And of course, it's the conversation more than the document in many cases that's important. Who'd like to take that on in a... No one's putting up their hand for a quick answer. Kerry's unmuted. So.
Well, it's a big one. I mean, I think the thing about for me, the enduring guardian document is particularly important because many of us end up in hospitals when we are unwell, and we may not end up in the hospital that's nearest to us that has connection with our GP. So the enduring guardian document is a document that that family members can basically nominate people who can speak for you if you can't speak for yourself. So, and for me, that is an important that's important for me, because those people named in my enduring guardian know what I want and can speak for me. I've empowered them to speak for me through the enduring guardian, and it's a legal document signed by a legal representative and a witness and people, and so for me, that is where advanced care plans, as much as I think they are absolutely important, and we still need to have them because it really brings to life the what we do and don't want. I do know of situations, and I'm sure there are people online who have had this happen for them, where advanced care plans have been regarded as too old, or not well written enough, or not written on the right document, or whatever. There is a, and I know we're all trying to change that. There is a looseness to advanced care planning that sometimes is worrying for people. So for me, an enduring guardian is the important document. They're all important, but I just want to make that point, I guess, about enduring guardian documents.
I think that, in my experience, I would agree. In terms of the advanced care, we'll put on the website the New South Wales stock standard document. It's a leaflet, but you can download it, and it's got a little introduction to how to make those decisions. And it's probably it doesn't take long to fill out. But there was a question as well about the difficulty of, and that really comes back to what you're talking about, Kerry, having the conversation with who is going to be your representative, your ambassador. How do you navigate confidentiality with the doctor to find out what's going on with your parents? And the simplest way I find to do that is to see if you could be present at the consultation with the doctor, because then your parents will be giving tacit approval to you being there and hearing all about it. And that's going to be really helpful. And it's something that people don't realize, that if they're there, they're giving consent. And that, again, gets that conversation going. Sometimes other generations don't like to have that conversation because we have suppressed it over the last 100 years or so. And we plan for birth. Why not plan for death? It's one of the mottos we go with. Just going to have a quick look and see if
Stephen, there's something that came through, yes, which is a bit of a common theme, as all of the panelists might have been tracking this. It's just how these conversations, but the ultimate thing of death, if you haven't had the conversation, it can bring out the worst in families. You know, a person there has talked about it was just the worst experience for her, for the person in her family who died, because all of these emotions were obviously bubbling for some time, not dealt with, and then a bit of an explosion. So I'd be interested to just hear any panelists talk about that whole thing of emotions and conversations.
And grief.
And grief, yes.
Which is often forgotten. Shane.
Yeah, I think it obviously would be beneficial for everybody to try and have the conversations, but I suppose it just depends on what the diagnosis is. As a lot of people, family members don't accept what's happening, and that's probably partly, I'm afraid, due to medical practitioners not maybe being as honest as they should be in an ideal world, because I know, my mum wasn't given realistic details about what the end stage of brain cancer would be like. And so it does get very sort of challenging at the end, but we had a really close relationship, and we were fortunate to live in Sydney, so we had the support of a community palliative care, but our family, I was able to stop everything else I was doing and take care of mum. But it can be a very traumatic time, especially when the suffering gets to an intolerable stage. And obviously Dying with Dignity gets a lot of calls, and I've noticed the calls have increased recently because people have heard that the law has passed, but they don't realise that it hasn't taken effect, and they're quite distressed, and they don't know what conversations they can have with the doctors. But as I said earlier, I always feel that it is definitely coming from a place of love. But I know Cam McLaren, who's one of the voluntary assisted dying doctors, he's an oncologist in Victoria, said that that patients are so pleased now that voluntary assisted dying is there as an option, because they can have these open and honest conversations with their doctor. And and the evidence overseas has shown that the relationship between patients and doctors in jurisdictions that have legalised assisted dying has definitely improved. So hopefully, I think those traumatic emotional times will be reduced, because those really traumatic end stages hopefully will not happen as often. But I was also wanting to ask Karen, I should say, are there any moves to have government support for end-of-life doulas? Because clearly that is a service for people who don't have family members who can stop everything and be their advocate and accompany them to doctor's appointments, etc. It would, the $35 to $65 an hour, I'm not saying that is unreasonable, it's certainly not, but there is a lot of hours that need to go to really accompany somebody, truly be there for them through the whole journey. So I wonder whether there have, and I'm sure others would be interested, are there any moves from your organisation and other death doulas to see if this can be funded in some way by the government?
Look, really great questions. And I was just having a look through the comment box as well. And obviously the cost thing has come up. So I'm going to let's talk about that head on first and then look at the hours separately. I think we need to recognise that an end-of-life doula might just hold a lot of information around things. Just like you might engage at the beginning of a pregnancy, I may want some assistance with giving birth, and engage with a birth doula. You may not actually call that birth doula once you're given birth, right? Lots of different things can happen in birth as well as death. And sometimes people have engagement with doula services if they have the support, and we're not talking about terminal illnesses here, we're talking about just general aging, I suppose, and health conditions. That could be, it is something that may never actually be needed. Other than that initial consultation, a discussion around what services they may need, and that may just be enough to put a family on track to be able to cope with everything that they need within their own units. Okay, so that is one version. In answer to your question, I don't know if there's any government funding coming in. I would desperately hope that we are working towards that right now. I know that one of the main motivations for Helen to get this course certified and recognised so that it can be something that someone is trained in, that we can then look at referring, services can be referred on, or a charity-based company or community-based organisation to be able to do this outreach, which would be amazing. I think for me, I work for many people for free. You know, I'm going to be very, very honest with you. Not that I want to fly that flag for doing this work voluntary for the rest of my life, because I have been doing a lot of voluntary work over the years. That's a compassionate community element. You know, the biggest thing that I took home from certainly the palliative care conference that I know I witnessed Kerry speaking at originally was that, you know, we're all human and we all should be doing this better. Like, this is full stop stuff. You know, if I can't inquire in with my neighbor who I haven't seen for 3 days, what am I doing as a human being? You know, I'm not showing up in any way the right version of us being human right now. So for me, it's a really big hearted response, is that I myself am away from my family. I'm originally from the UK. I'm here in Australia. And I recognize that, you know, I would hope that someone would give me the compassion that I ultimately would have given someone else in my life when I am at the end of mine. You know, that's what I'm holding dear to my own heart.
I think that's very realistic. I think
yes,
that's
I hope
realistic. So. And I think that things are changing. And Ian Hickey was talking about suicide, and, you know, is there any wrong way to talk to someone about their feelings? There's no wrong way to talk to someone about their feelings. There's no wrong way to talk to someone about death. And all the evidence is that when you help someone, your health improves. And that's a strong force in our culture. Hoping for funding, if they won't fund medical services, they're unlikely to be funding doulas. So it really is back to the community. I feel, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen very little money going into palliative care that will make a difference to allow people to stay at home. So it is the community. It is everyone out there. All of you people out there, have the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think I will say that the only loophole, I suppose, I have found in this is that, you know, I am registered support carer at this stage. So I am engaged through websites like mabel.com for additional supports, which are in the aged care sector for their support plans, and also the NDIS support agencies. So I often cross paths where clients are not physically paying for their services in its entirety, but I might be able to just come in and help them in a small way to set the seed for them to be able to lean into their own existing communities and move things forward. Yeah.
Okay, folks, we're really coming to the end of our session, and I'm sure we could go on for at least another half an hour, but time is now noon, and the first thing that I would love to do is to just, you know, take a deep breath and think how amazing it's been that we've been able to share this time together. And I thank you very much, Kerry, and to Shane, and to Karen, and to Stephen for co-facilitating with me. So if this webinar today and the conversations have brought up a whole lot of issues for you, please make sure that you contact someone close to you. If you haven't got someone close to you, don't forget Lifeline is there on 13 11 14. That's 13 11 14. Keep the conversations happening, folks. It's very important that we have quality right up until the very end. My family know that I want to be buried in my favourite orange coat, with a bag of prawns and a bottle of wine, and Bette Midler playing as I leave this life. So put those plans in place. So just to remind everyone that this whole webinar, of course, we've been recording it, and it goes up on our website and our YouTube channel. Our next one is going to be, which is a completely different topic, but we're going to have a session about gardening. Now, if you've heard the things just recently, I was listening to ABC Radio the other morning, and this woman came on. She's a prolific gardener. She loves listening to music, especially classical music. She has her headphones on, she does the gardening, and she says she's the healthiest person around. So we're going to explore the impact of gardening on people's health, and that's a topic that I think will be very popular. So again, to you, Kerry, to you, Karen, and to you, Shane, thank you so much for joining us today. We've really enjoyed your honesty and what you've been able to share with us. So folks, that's all from us. That's all from COTA New South Wales. I'll see you soon, Stephen, at a board meeting. And thanks to the COTA New South Wales staff, to Karen and Megan for helping us today. So take care, everyone, and bye for now.